Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining Building and Fire Board of Appeals hearing. This is September meeting, and thank you for being us today. Have the roll call, please.
Sure. Board Member Lanoy.
Here.
Board Member Tatulian.
Here.
Board Member Takmajian. Absent. Board Member Lee.
Here.
Chairman Keshishian.
Here.
Going on to item number 2, report regarding posting of agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on Tuesday, September 13, 2016 on the bulletin board outside City Hall and on the city website. Going on item number 3, presentation and accommodations. Today we have none. Going on item number 4, approval of minutes, April 20, 2016.
May I entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the board meeting April 20, 2016?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you.
Going on item number 5, or...
You have to vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. Roll call.
Oh, roll call, please, yes.
Board Member Lanoy.
Here. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Board Member Tatulian.
Yes.
Board Member Lee.
Yes.
Chairman Keshishian.
Yes.
Going on item number 5, oral communication. Today we have none. Item number 6, old business. Today we have none. Item number 7, new business. Introduction of proposal local amendments to Title 24, California Code Regulations for 2017 Glendale Building and Safety Code.
Okay, it is that time of the decade where every 3 years the state requires that any amendments that we wish to make to the state code that is adopted through the Title 24 California Code of Regulations, that we have our local amendments reviewed and approved by ultimately by our city council, adopted by our city council. And so this is our presentation of our recommendations for the 2017 Glendale Building and Safety Code. Many of the amendments in our local code are continuations of existing amendments. Many of them are administrative in nature, some are technical, and some are just to make things work, function for the city of Glendale. We will be presenting to you the significant changes to the Glendale Building and Safety Code from previous years. We will go through the list of codes that we will be adopting, and there is a new volume this year as a result of state changes that the state has made. We have our local adoption process and the requirements behind it, and the legal requirements behind it for us to be able to adopt a code that is enforceable. We'll be going through our proposed amendments, and not all of them, because it's, as you saw from the attachment, it's a fairly substantial document. Yes, indeed. It's about 600 pages. We will be going through the changes from previous code, Glendale code. And then at the very end, we'll give you the guideline for when we have to have it all adopted to be enforceable when the new code goes into effect January 1. A little bit of a background on the California codes. A lot of people think Title 24 is just energy. No, it's not just the energy code. Title 24 refers to the California Code of Regulations, Title 24 that is adopted by the Building Standards Commission. It includes many separate parts. There's 12 specifically at the moment. The California Administrative Code, the Building Code, the Residential Code, the Electrical Code, Mechanical Code, Plumbing Code, Energy Code, State Historical Building Code, Fire Code, Existing Building Code, Green Building Code, and the Reference Standards Code. We do not necessarily have significant changes to each of those codes. Many of the changes that we have, or the local amendments, are for administrative purposes for several of these codes. And as we go through the presentation, you'll see that. The legal requirements behind it come from the Health and Safety Code. The various sections give us the background, requires the local jurisdiction to adopt the California Building Standards Code for local amendments within 180 days after Title 24 CC&Rs are published. They were published July 1st, so we have the 180 days giving us till January 1st to adopt our local amendments. In adopting Title 24 for local enforcement, the jurisdiction can amend the standards, that's our local amendments, but we have to justify those amendments. They either on the basis of local geologic, topographic, climatic conditions, or for administrative purposes. You have administrative standards versus building standards, and only changes to the building standards need to be justified on the basis of local geologic, topographic, or climatic conditions. Establishment of the administrative standards are specified in the Health and Safety Code and do not require the justification. So in some cases, as we go through it, we'll say it's an administrative in nature. We don't need to go any further than that based on the health and safety regulations. I've already spoken about the 180-day limitation. If we want to be able to enforce our local amendments the day the new code goes into effect, we have to follow this very strict timeline. After that, we have some difficulties. If we miss that deadline, we have some difficulties having our local amendments be enforceable. So we want to make sure we don't miss those deadlines. Glendale Building and Safety Code is making changes and specifically adopting 9 of the 12 volumes. Some of the volumes we really use alternatives, so we're not making specific adoptions, and if we're not making amendments to them, we don't have to do add it in as a specific portion of the Glendale Building and Safety Code. It defaults. The state says we're required to enforce those regulations as of January 1st. However, if we need to make any local amendments, then we do have to include that in as one of the volumes in the Glendale Building and Safety Code. The new volume this year is Volume 1C, the existing building standards. We are anticipating that in the next code cycle that it will be taken out and published as a separate volume. So we're anticipating and getting our organization set up for that now so that it doesn't become so burdensome when we go to adopt it in the next code cycle. Then we have the California Building Standards Commission adopts the state codes. Once they adopt them, then they publish them. Once they're published, then we are allowed to do our amendments as long as we have the appropriate justification. The California Building Standards Commission adopts the California Building Code, the California Residential Code, the California Plumbing Code, the California Mechanical Code, the California Electric Code, the California Fire Code, the California Existing Building Code, and the California Green Building Standards Code. Also adopted, but as separate codes, are the California Energy Code and the California Historical Building Code. And we are not proposing any local amendments to either of those, the last two, the Energy Code or the Historical Building Code.
It's fairly easy.
Okay, so I think at this point I need to introduce Chris Agus as part of the code adoption team, and he will be continuing on with the presentation.
Okay, good afternoon, board members, Chairman Kashishian, and board members. First of all, before I get started, I just want to introduce the code adoption team that we have. That's, of course, myself, Jan Edwards, Stuart Tom, Jan Bear, and also with us today in the audience, one of them anyway. I'd like to thank these couple of people who were instrumental in getting and preparing this package for you. And we have Colin Long, and I think an audience we have Philip Chur right there, Tony Eskandari, and Antonio Abejo. So they're not here today, of course, they're out there doing some plan checking. So before I get started with introducing some of the amendments for the benefit of the members and also in the interest in the presentation and in keeping forward, I would like to just ask the board members if they have any question to defer them at each of the volumes, so that way we can get through this as quickly as we can with interruptions. Next, please.
I'm sorry, did you say that questions
at the end of each volume?
End of each volume?
Yeah, each volume. Okay, so
Do we need to tell GTV6 because they're not switching it over to that? Because normally we want the constituents to see that, right?
Let me follow up on that.
Maybe we're not.
They got it. They got it.
Oh,
okay,
now they
great.
switched over.
Okay, as far as Volume 1A, the building standards is concerned, that's a new California building code is based on the 2000 International Code, which is published by ICC. Many of the changes were necessary for the Glendale Building and Safety Code, basically to match the IBC formats. And also many of the proposed amendments, like Jan was saying, are similar to the 2014 Glendale Building and Safety Code. And some of the amendments that are included and which are basically continued in this code cycle, those are a few of the examples there. Work exempt from permit, fees by council resolution, unlawful acts is another one. Next slide, please. Also, unsafe hazards in buildings, penalties, as well as requiring for disaster repair and reconstruction. Okay, now getting into the amendments, this amendment here, which is Section 1A-8, which is a new amendment. This is Chapter 1, Division 2. This is Section 105.3.1.1, which is electric vehicle charging station review process. So this is a response to Assembly Bill 1236, where local provisions to facilitate compliance with an expedited, streamlined permit and inspection process. As a city, we are starting this early. One of the criteria for requiring this or including this in the code cycle is that if the city has over 200,000 or less than 200,000, in this case, I believe we're just under that. So actually, those would go into effect in terms of the Assembly bill would be in September 30th of next year. That's when we technically should have that in place, but we're going to get this in early. The next item in Volume 1A, in the next section, is this is an amendment to an existing section. And right now what this amendment is it limits the work what an unlicensed designer can prepare. This amendment clarifies our building and safety current practice when taking and reviewing plans, and this allows the building official to require all construction documents submitted for permit shall be approved and stamped by licensed architect or engineer, and unless determined by the building official, based upon review of the construction documents, that the scope is minor in nature. So if it's small enough, minor nature, alteration, remodels, a small retaining wall that's not, taking any surcharge, planter wall, those are kind of some of the examples. Next section. Okay, this section, which is 1A-17, is his reinspection. This amendment actually is, we're restoring and reintroducing this. This was a previous requirement in the building code that allowed the building official to assess reinspection fees in cases such as when inspections called for but work is not complete, or when corrections called for are not made. So, and this amendment actually makes the building standards in Volume 1A consistent with the residential standard as well as the mechanical plumbing standards. So this requirement is actually in the mechanical and plumbing standards as of today. Next section. Section 1A-25. Okay. This is an existing amendment, and what we're doing with this section, which is Section 110.7, refuse and recycling storage, this is a Glendale amendment, specific to Glendale, and this existing amendment is being revised to establish refuse and recycling storage room requirements to facilitate compliance with state recycling mandates. So, and for now, I would like to go ahead and introduce Regina Wheeler from Integrated Waste to just talk a little bit more about it.
I'm Regina Wheeler, the recycling coordinator, and Rachel's going to hand out a couple of things for you. The first one is the revised city code that we are proposing. Sure. And the second one here is the handout we'd like to give at the front counter. So just to give you some background, Cal Recycle and our legislators have changed recycling mandates so that cities have to achieve 75% diversion, and we also are now requiring organics recycling at specific properties, and at multifamily units of 5 or more, they do have to recycle bottles and cans. So for that reason, and because of the fact that it's the California Green Building Code requires recycling by occupants, and it requires them to recycle paper, cardboard, glass, plastics, organic waste, and metals. We would like to revise the code to require only one garbage room, because currently there are 2, which can add some confusion to people sometimes when they go to take their refuse out. They're sort of confused as to, does the garbage or recycling go here? And so for that reason, we'd like to have both the garbage and recycling in one enclosure, just to make it easier for people. And then in the enclosure to have better signage and to make it easier for the tenant or the resident to determine where things go. We're also going to be requiring garbage, recycling, and organics in each enclosure. And this would only be at properties of 5 units or more, and of commercial properties. So it requires adequate space to recycle 50% of the estimated debris. And the estimated debris, you can see how we calculate it on the handout that we have. It is determined based upon the type of business that it has, if it's a business, or it's based upon the number of units that the property has, if it is a residential complex. And those are all from calculations that we've gotten from Cal Recycle and from other cities, and how they determine estimated debris, or the total refuse that will come out of specific properties. And because we know that space is an issue, we have tried to make the space in between bins as small as we can, but still allow adequate space for our trucks and other trucks to service the containers. So you'll see in there a 12-inch clearance between the bins. And now we also do require a roof on the enclosures, which we didn't have before, and that is something to accommodate. We're trying to help with stormwater and things along those lines. There is also a no parking sign and a pedestrian access door. That is one of the key components on there as well. And then also, if a property has garbage chutes, they have to have a recycling chute and something also for organics, unless they choose to have a singular chute and have it rotate between materials. So we are just trying to implement the state code and trying to figure out how to make it so that each property is going to be implementing these requirements. So can I answer any questions or...
Any questions from board members?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Well, I have a question. I want to clarify that these requirements apply to new construction only, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Regina. Let's go ahead and continue. The general code requirements, like I said, I'm going to reiterate this pretty much for every section. Many amendments are similar to the Glendale Building and Safety Code, and some amendments are relocated to match the IBC format. And some examples are Chapter 4 and 9 are amended to be consistent with the Fire Code amendments. Chapter 15 has been amended to restrict wood roofs and limit assemblies to Class A or B. Next. Okay, so Section 1A, 33, 34, and 35. Okay, as far as this amendment, what we're doing with this amendment is we're maintaining the restrictions that were contained in the 2014 Glendale and Building Safety Code. So, and some of you, as you know, this amendment addressed Section 504.2 and 506.3, which is automatic sprinkler system increase, which are no longer in the new code but incorporated in these tables. So these are new tables. So what we've done with these tables is basically is we're going to limit the condition under which increases in height and number of stories are allowed when fire sprinklers are installed for Group R2 buildings of Type 5A construction. So basically, it's technically the same requirement that we're maintaining for this code cycle. Okay, so Section 1A97, this is just clarification, and this is from our friends upstairs at engineering. They just want to make sure that an amendment was provided for this section, or added for this section to clarify stormwater and drainage retention as mandated by the state to also be provided during demolition phase and construction. So, as we know, a lot of times demolitions occur prior to the construction, and we just want to make that clear to developers that, you know, you are required to provide stormwater drainage and retention during the demolition phase.
Excuse me, Chris, what happened to the other amendments? You jumped all the way to 1A97. What happened to the rest?
Oh, no. What I'm introducing to you today are all the new ones. The ones that are existing, like I was saying in the beginning and Jan was saying, they are being maintained, and these, what I'm presenting you today, are the new ones that are being added to the Glendale Building and Safety Code.
Okay.
He's following the handout that he gave, this page here. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
The Glendale Building and Safety Code to the analysis of amendments.
Oh,
You're following that breakdown,
Yes.
right?
The first
Yes,
packet.
yes. As you can see, if you had the color version,
Okay.
there is green and there is blue on it. The blue ones are
Right.
technically the new amendments. I think John Tatulian has been with us the last code cycle. That's what we did the last time. Is that the blue items are new, and then the green items are the existing amendments that are carried forth.
Okay. Including the ones that are already underlined. So the underlined items are amendments that are already in place.
Again, if it's blue or green, green meaning yes, they are in place now, and we're just carrying that forward.
And blue is just a new one.
And blue is the new one.
Okay.
Okay. So, okay, the next section actually is still Volume 1A under the structural amendments. The IBC regulates by reference national standards such as AAC 7, ACI 318, or AISC. And Again, many of these amendments are similar to the 2014 Glendale and Building Safety Code. Next slide, please. And also, many are consistent with the Los Angeles Regional Uniform Code Program, which is established by ICC LA Basin Chapter. And also, several of the amendments are new to address deficiencies in the reference standards. And the next slide will show one of them. And I'm not going to go into technical detail, but this section of the amendment, this amendment is a revision. Again, Section 1A-54 is a revision to Section 12.8.1.3 in AC 710 contained in the building code. And this amendment is made to be consistent with ASC 716 Supplement 1. Next section, please. Okay, so Section 1A-57, this is a new code, new amendment that we've added, 1701.3 Technical Specialty. And basically what this amendment allows us as a building official is on complex projects, buildings and structure, where special expertise is needed, of course, as determined by the building official. For special, as determined by the building official, to be observed, inspected, or certified by a third party that has certification or demonstrated expertise in this identified work. So as an example, one would be fire membrane penetrations, firewall penetrations. So typically, those are some of the issues that we're facing basically constantly as new developments come in as far as mixed-use projects within the city of Glendale. So another example potentially would be CASP inspection. May be part of that. Next section, please. Okay, this is another structural amendment. Again, I'm not going to go into detail, but basically this amendment limits the use of stapled nail fasteners in shear walls, floor diaphragms, and to maintain a minimum quality of construction performance consistent with the IBC. This next section, Section 1A-106, this is an amendment to an existing section, and we have adopted Appendix I, which is patio covers. And what we're doing with this amendment is basically this section allows a design load, dead load plus live load of 10 pounds PSF live load for patio covers. So what we want to do here and with this amendment is prohibit the installation of any solar energy system on patio covers designed by this section unless lateral design is verified. So, and next section, which is the grading standards. One thing I just want to mention with Appendix Chapter J is that it's basically the same as the 2014 Glendale Building and Safety Code. So there's no changes there. And with that, that ends the amendments for Volume 1A. So if there's any questions, myself or Jan and Jan Bear can answer any of those questions at this time.
Any questions from the board members?
I have
Yes.
a question regarding the trash enclosures, the presentation that was made. Has that worked at any of the other cities? Do we have any type of reference in terms of the cover, the storm drain issues that you brought up regarding that?
So Pasadena does have some issues related. Not issues. They do have some. They do take storm drain issues into concern when they are built, but these new, like the 50% and things like that. That's a very new requirement for the state. So a lot of areas around here have not mandated that there's space for it, but because of the Green Building Code now requiring organics, a lot of locations don't have space unless the requirements are changed. So I don't know if that answers your question at all.
No, I just wanted to, the basic question was, do we have a reference and whether it works or not, or are we going to be the first ones implementing that, or do we have a model to follow?
Northern California, a lot of Northern California does it, and there are some in Central California that do it. But I couldn't find anything, in neighboring that's already done it because it's very new. So these are codes that have, just gone through. So yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question about the design professionals and responsible charge. Section 107.3.4 to be specific. Could you elaborate on that section, the amendment, please? And what exactly does that do?
Okay, well, why don't I go ahead and pass on this question to Jan Bear?
Okay.
In the existing code...
Wait, can you give us one second to come to that?
Sure.
It's section 107.3.4.
Page number 14.
Well, I'm not sure it's the same thing. That
It's not the same.
He's looking at a different page 14.
That's all right, I'll follow.
Here. I know it's...
Page 14 and...
When you went over
Volume
this,
one
you just went over 107.
1A-13.
Excuse me?
1A-13.
13. Okay, great.
Yes, 1A-13.
That's what I was trying to get at. Okay.
1A-13, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, section 1A-13 and subsection, I suppose, 107.3.4.
You're looking at the basic. This is the volume.
I got to tell you, these numbers are very confusing, which is very true with every code. Okay.
Commissioners, Chairman, I'm Jan Bear, the Deputy Building Official. Whenever we issue permits, it's always a question of whether we're going to require a design professional or not. What we did is, traditionally, the code has when you need it. Well, and then it's up to the building official to come up with you need it now. What we basically did is reverse that. You need it now unless we say you don't. So we'll have a policy in place by November for small room addition, not room additions, but say window permits or stucco permits, where obviously the work is minor in nature. You won't need a design professional. But for the most part, if you go through a tenant improvement or something that requires professional knowledge, we have it in the code, so you need a design professional. And that just eliminates any need for confrontation when we're trying to decide whether you need one or not. They could look online, they can see our code amendment and know that they need a design professional before they even come in.
So by design professional, you don't necessarily mean a registered and licensed design professional, anyone who can prepare, let's say, plans.
Anyone that can prepare, well, ours requires them to be licensed, either an engineer or an architect or a certified interior designer. We will accept those as licensed design professional, registered design professionals. Many designers that are not licensed assume that they could do a lot of work. It may work that way if it's minor in nature, but a lot of designers are getting involved in structural elements. Well, at that point, we need a design professional.
So basically, you're doing away with owner-builder permitting, say.
An owner trying to design a room addition, you're right. But currently, we require an engineer of record even for a room addition. The current code, there was a change during the last cycle for soils reports that basically said if you're in a high seismic area, you need a soils report. So a design professional was required no matter what, because I think there may be one lot that doesn't meet that standard in Glendale. We had amendments last time that said, okay, if you have a design professional looking at the footings, we'll minimize when you need soils reports. This basically requires the engineer, without going through the circular route of saying, well, you need it for the soils, then we'll waive it over here. This just makes it straight out. No, have a design professional when you come in, and if it's minor in nature, if they're just remodeling a bathroom, of course we're not going to require it.
Jan and all the staff members, as you guys know, in this city specifically, there are a lot of design professionals out there who are practicing in this field, preparing plans, whether it's residential, commercial, tenant improvement, whatnot, and submitting to building department for review. And of course, as part of those projects that they have, there are certain areas that does require, obviously, a registered professional, whether it's an architect or engineer, to sign and stamp the drawings. Now, does this mean that you are requiring now those portions that are required to be designed and approved by a licensed engineer, have that licensed engineer also responsible for the portion of the work that does not require an unlicensed person to prepare? For example, a room addition, as we said. It's an architectural drawing, and any designer can prepare that. Elevations, whatnot, none of that requires any registered engineer or architect to prepare. So as we go on to the structural aspects of it, and an engineer designs it and signs and stamps the drawings, a structural part only, does that mean that they have to go ahead and stamp and sign the architectural portion also, even though they did not prepare that?
Nothing is changing from the current implementation. Much the same way as the project you described, the engineer would be required to stamp the architectural plans if the dimensions for the project were on them. If the structural plans were completely independent, then our determination would be exactly the same. The architectural parts are not required to be stamped, but the structural are. But when they come in, they need that to know that an engineer will be required for that structural part. And this basically clarifies it so that they know that they can't come in with unlicensed plans for a room addition and then wait to be told they need it. The code is real clear. You need it right up front.
Okay, very well. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Honestly, I do have a few more, but it seems to me that I'm a little confused here because of the green and the blue. I thought the underlined is what's being amended in this code cycle, but now I'm hearing that underlined text, it's already in place. And I do have some questions on the underlying text that's already in place, and I'm not quite sure how exactly we passed these in the previous code cycles. But then again, this is a different discussion we can have maybe later. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you have the color?
No, I didn't print it color. I printed it black and white.
Follow the color here.
Yeah, the blue text, obviously, it's very, it's not as much. The green text is a lot, and I thought all the green is what you're proposing now.
Yeah, it is what every code cycles we have to, even if they're existing, we have to reintroduce them. So a lot of the green ones are being reintroduced. So if you look at the analysis of amendments, it will say this is based on the 2000 and similar to the 2002, 2011, 2014. So by looking at the analysis of amendments, you can now make a conclusion that, okay, we've had this for the last 4 or 5 cycles. We're just bringing it back because every 3 years we do have to reintroduce those amendments again.
So the fact that you're reintroducing the existing amendments again, do we have an opportunity to comment or make any suggestions on those? Or those are already in the code and cannot be altered? Well, I'm sure they can.
No, I think you have that opportunity to do comment on those sections that have been established.
Yes, you do at this point in time have the opportunity to make comments on the Glendale amendments.
Everything is black and white for you then.
Thank you for that clarification. Well, if that is the case, I'm just gonna throw it out there. I have a question on section 903.2.20.2 that has to do with fire sprinklers and existing occupancies or new occupancies. That would be 903.2.20.1 new occupancies, and goes on to 903.2.20.2 existing occupancies. This is a very sensitive issue, as you guys know, and probably you deal with this almost daily basis on all your projects, as I hear. Is there any thought to make any changes to this section for projects that we go through design, and let's say the threshold after valuation of alteration exceeds the 50% of the replacement value that does require sprinkler be provided in existing portion of the building. Is there any thought that it can be improved to make it a little easier for people out there and for the staff to make that determination?
Originally, this came from an ordinance that went through City Council in the late 89 or 1990 as a result of the College Hills fires, where Glendale realized with the existing fire staff that we had and the limitations of some of our physical construction, the narrowness of existing roads, this was determined to be a requirement that Glendale needed in order to maintain a safe community. It went through and was passed as a separate ordinance with that language by City Council. And has been continued each year in Glendale's Building and Safety Code as a result of that ordinance and the direction by City Council. It has been a number of years, and there's been no request by City Council to readdress it. So we've essentially just been replicating that amendment in each code cycle. Does the Fire Marshal have anything to add?
If I may, Chairman Kashishi and members of the Commission, I think what I hear the concern is twofold. Number one, that from time to time, when a project starts to approach the triggers, that sometimes it may be difficult to ascertain whether or not a project should be subjected to a sprinkler retrofit. The only thing that I can comment there is, regardless of what the triggers are, you're always going to have projects which teeter on that threshold. And whether or not it's a valuation threshold, whether or not you have a maximum floor area added, whether or not you have a change in occupancy to a different classification, that's going to happen, and that's unavoidable. The other issue is more fundamental, and I think it gets to the crux of what you're referring to, Chairman Kashishi, and that's whether or not this community and many communities want to have a retrofit or a trigger in there to ultimately require existing buildings to one day become sprinklered. And I think that the only comment that I can have is this community back in the late 80s and our building official is exactly correct. It was a result of the College Hills fire. I think that they were really visionary at the time because when that occurred, there was actually only one other community at the time that had taken that bold step, and that was the city of San Clemente. We were very soon after that to follow, and then many other communities started to do the same thing. And then, lo and behold, we get to where we are now, and automatic sprinkler systems in residential buildings, and all buildings for that matter, have become such an important aspect of community safety that they are now required for all new construction. I think it's pretty safe to say that it is recognized that sprinklers do increase safety. Eventually, I think that a lot of communities would like all buildings, including all existing buildings, to be sprinklered in order to provide people the level of safety that we as a safe community would like to see. But what we have to do is we have to be sensitive to the fact that the people who own, live, work, and play in these buildings don't just have unrestricted funds where we could do that, and so we have to be responsible and gradually phase that in. And this is the manner in which all communities do that, come up with a reasonable standard. And when, and only when, a construction project reaches that threshold, then that one building will be brought into compliance with contemporary safety standards. Over time, it would be wonderful if our entire community were sprinklered and that we could rest assured that if there was ever a fire that occurred, especially when people are asleep, unaware that something's going on, that we wouldn't have any injuries or loss of life. I think that back when our city leaders chose the triggers that we have, a lot of thought went into it. Considering where we are right now, and considering some of the other cities, I can tell you that the triggers that we have here are very, very reasonable. There are many other communities that have contacted us and asked us, what are your triggers? And they've replicated those in their communities. So that being said, I think that addressing your two issues, number one, fundamentally, should we go to the trouble of gradually over time make our unsprinklered buildings safer? By virtue of the fact that those triggers are very reasonable, I think that it's a good thing to do. And then number two, should the triggers be changed? Do you want an apple? Do you want an orange? It's still a piece of fruit. I think that the triggers that we have are pretty good. I will say this. The building department staff does a fantastic job. Every time there is a project that gets close to that trigger, they take a look at it. And if a project really is underneath that threshold, they don't require the sprinklers. If the project is so significant, some of these projects, and we know what a lot of them are, where there's a small home and next thing you know, the addition doubles or triples the size. And I'm not even talking about the McMansionization sort of things. I'm just talking about significant additions. Well, if a project is so significant that the walls, the ceilings, all of this is stripped of the drywall and extensive construction is being done, that is exactly the time that you want to go ahead and put in the sprinkler system. And considering the fact that for those that generally tend to be concerned, which are the residential remodel projects, in most instances, we allow plastic piping for those sprinklers. So it is reasonable. And I think that that's the opportune moment to do it.
Well, thank you very much for your explanation. I think your point is well taken. And as you said, construction projects that do have that extensive remodeling, such as you mentioned, where they expose the walls and ceilings and whatnot, at that point, I don't see any reason why they cannot. I just wanted to know if there is a way that you guys come up with that replacement value such that it's not so problematic with staff and arguing with staff and contractors and the design professionals out there. And if I may continue with the next one, this one doesn't have to apparently with any remodeling. The next section, which talks about existing low-rise buildings, subsection 7. Again, sprinklers for existing low-rise buildings. And I read through this, but I don't see any remodeling or construction or anything in here. Is this city requiring that existing low-rise buildings, such as 3- and 4-story apartment buildings of R2 occupancy, be sprinklered?
Chairman Kashishian, let me just address this and put this to rest. This is a carryover of a provision which was added to the code quite some time ago, which was indeed intended to retrofit existing buildings. Our community decided that any building 4 stories or more in height presented a higher level of risk, and at that time, an ordinance was passed. It was duly considered, and it was required that existing buildings be sprinklered. They've been done. So this, in effect, does not affect any other buildings. As with all safety retrofit ordinances, you still have to leave those provisions in the code because you might discover a building that you were unaware of when you enforced the original ordinance, and you still want those standards on the books so that you can still require that retrofit safety standard. A prime example that I'm sure you would be very, very familiar with are the URM buildings that have been updated. We're pretty certain that all of those have also been updated, but statewide there is still a standard there to address the unreinforced masonry buildings. And the reason that that is there is we might have a building that has a coat of plaster on it, and we have no idea that it's an unreinforced building, and one day we may come across it. And if you stop carrying those standards forward, our ability to bring it into a contemporary safety standard goes away. But all of those provisions for low-rise, mid-rise, and high-rise, they have been in effect for quite some time. They're already addressed.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Volume 1A.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and proceed with Volume 1B. Volume Volume 1B is the 2016 California Residential Code, which is based on the 2015 International Code as published by ICC. And Volume 1B applies to 1 and 2 family dwellings up to 3 stories in height, including townhomes 3 stories, including live-work units complying with Section 419, and excludes structural requirements with hillside projects and wood frame construction greater than 1 story. So a lot of the amendments in Volume 1B are similar to the 2014 Glendale Building Code with several new amendments. And one of the new amendments here, again, I'm just going to mention that this is similar. Section 1B-16. It's similar to an amendment we just discussed earlier in Volume 1A, and this is regarding re-inspections. Next item. And this is the section here. So next slide, please. Volume 1B General Code Requirements. Again, many of the amendments are similar to Volume 1A, and they're necessary to be consistent with the 2014 Glendale and Building and Safety Code. And some of those sections or chapters, as Chapter 3 was amended to be, again, consistent with the Fire Code. Chapter 4 was amended to refer to the California Building Code for Appendix J for grading requirements. And then also Chapter 9 was amended to provide requirements for installation of roof coverings and solar photovoltaic panels. Next slide, please. Volume 1B structural amendments. The IRC regulates by reference the national standards such as ASC 7, ASI 318, and RAISC. And again, many of these structural amendments are similar to the 2014 Glendale Building and Safety Code. Next section, please. Okay, these sections, Section IB-28, 29, and 30, this amendment is similar to Section 1A in Volume 1A, which is the design professional in charge. So I think we discussed that in length earlier. But this is capturing the same essence, the same amendment that we're carrying forward to 1B. Volume 1B, again, structural amendments. Section IB-76. And again, this is similar to actually, this is the same as in Volume 1A as we adopt Appendix H, which is patio covers. So this is also, again, in Volume 1A, and we're just duplicating it here in Volume 1B for patio covers. Well, basically that ends Volume 1B amendments, and if there's any question from the board.
The only question that I would think about with the Section R116, construction toilet facilities, it's saying that every toilet shall be a water flush type and shall be connected to a public sewer or private sewer. Porta potties don't have flushable, right?
I think that's for the regular.
What section is that? 1-1?
Section R116. Because that's in a lot of the sections, the construction toilet facilities. That was the only thing that was a little ambiguous to me. So it says water flush type. 21 in the Volume 1B.
Right. 6, right?
Volume 1B.
Yeah, this is 1.6 I'm looking for. So I'm in here.
So I would make the assumption that you're trying to say that if they're remodeling a home, then you got to have a flushable toilet. But if you on a project,
Yeah, just have
you're specifying that
right.
that to be a porta potty is what they're going to be putting out there, and for you to specify that it has to be a water flush type, that's going to be a little
Expensive.
Well, no, there's no such.
No, I know that.
Well, technically there is. There's the executive porta potties have the flushable. So I think this is already in existence. So nobody caught that, or am I the only one?
You're apparently the first one to catch that.
Very good.
Well done.
With that, with the construction, I will verify and respond, and then
Just
at our
tweak the wording a little bit just to make sure everything's covered there.
correct, we may have in picking up a previous version may have merged two sentences or copied over a sentence from another section inappropriately. But I will confirm that, and then we'll have it corrected for the actual recommendation at the October meeting.
Because a few of the other volumes have the same thing in it, so keep that in mind.
I will go through each volume to confirm.
If you look at the last sentence, it says, in lieu of flush water closets approved, chemical toilets may be provided.
Okay.
Toilets may not be located within 10 feet of a property line. So we want them that way, but then we give you the exception.
Got it. Okay.
Well, that's good.
Just wanted to make sure, because like I said, first reading it, then...
That last sentence, it always gets you.
Okay.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Good job. Yes, go ahead.
no.
Please.
Well, section 1A-76 with regards to the patio covers, and that's to do with the structural integrity that it won't sustain the
Yes,
weight.
that is correct. In both Volume 1A and 1B is Appendix H and Appendix I. We've adopted the patio cover section, and in that section there is a design criteria for design load. So what we wanted to make sure was that, first off, if you're going to be designing based on those design loads, and specifically if you're going to add a solar system on the roof, we wanted to make sure that you're not going to be basically, destroying the integrity of the structure itself as far as like lateral loads are concerned. So we know that most likely vertical loads should most likely going to be fine, but it's the lateral load that we're concerned about. So if this, but again, there's a way out of that if they can provide justification that it meets either Chapter 16 or an engineer can verify through calculations that the lateral loads are going to be fine and okay, and checks it, then we're going to allow that photovoltaic system or solar system to be installed on that structure.
Thank you.
Chris, I'm not quite familiar with that patio cover section because since we've never adopted that. But doesn't that section refer to the prefabricated aluminum type patio covers? I don't think those are designed patio covers.
I believe you're most likely correct.
Because I can't imagine an engineer uses a 10 PSF live load for a
correct. That's correct.
Framed design. That okay. I have a question. Again, this is obviously existing amendment. I just want a clarification. On the geotechnical issues, on the soil report requirement, that would be section R401.4. Just a clarification item, R401.4, soil tests. This section, as I understand it, it does require SO report for almost everything, with the exception of, there are a few exceptions, and one of them has to do with 500 square foot addition. And my question is the 500 square feet addition or an accessory structure of less than 500 square feet, is that only on the first floor, or it can be on the second floor or the third floor?
I believe it also says one-story structures.
No, I put a comment next to it, one story. It says, and all additions less than 500 square feet or accessory structures or ancillary structures less than 500 square feet. And of course, there's prescriptive method for the foundation size and the reinforcement and whatnot, which is good.
I think we missed a section because the last amendments we had, this mimics the current amendments that we have, and it was limited to one story, so we'll double check.
So it's a one-story addition only, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think it says not in the high fire hazard area.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other comments from board members? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Next volume 1C.
Actually,
I'm sorry.
carbon
Monoxide detectors?
Is it in there? I scanned it so fast that
It's in the regular code.
Oh,
We didn't
okay.
have to amend it to put it in.
got it. Okay.
Thank you. Volume 1C, existing building standard. As you know, this is a new volume, as Jan indicated earlier. The 2016 existing building code adopts portions of the 2015 International Building Code with California amendments. And basically, Chapter 34 has been eliminated from the IBC, and all of that language is now moved into Volume 1C, the existing building code. And many changes were necessary to the new Glendale Building and Safety Code, basically to match the international existing building code format and be consistent with, again, the 2014 Glendale Building and Safety Code. In Volume 1C, there is now a detailed provision for detailed administrative provisions located in Chapter 1 and Division 2. Many amendments in Division 1, Chapter 1, Division 2 are similar to that of Volume 1A and 1B. Several new amendments were added to be consistent with Volume 1A and 1B. And you're going to be familiar with those because they're the similar ones that we added for Volume 1A and 1B. The next section, in this section, IC-27 and 28, this amendment, again, as determined by the building official, may require that all portions of the building be brought up to the current building code or California residential code if the addition, alteration, or a combination of addition, alteration, construction, valuation, if 50% over its previous value. If you have any questions today, we can answer them at the end of the volume. So I know you can have questions on that.
Specifically that verbiage, previous
correct.
value.
So section IC-29, which is section 406.1, replacement glass. What we're doing here is we're amending this to maintain in place the standards that have been applied in building safety as we adopt the building code. The installation or replacement of glass and windows shall be required for new installation, specifically as specified within Chapter 7A of the California Building Code in the high fire hazard area. The next section, IC-30, is section 406.3, is the replacement windows, emergency escape and rescue opening. And this section, this amendment, what we're doing here is maintaining in place the standards that have been applied in building safety as we adopt the existing building code. And emergency escape and rescue opening shall comply with Chapter 10, or Section 1030 of the California Building Code, and Chapter 3, Section R310 and 312 of the Residential Code. So we want to make sure that emergency escape and rescue windows are maintained. So that concludes Volume 1C. Any questions from the board?
I'm concerned about the verbiage for replacement windows, just to clarify, it's meaning that if you take out the existing window, replace it with a new one, that's what you consider new, right? Okay. Because like you said, to the layman, it's going to be a little confusing because you're talking replacement, but it's new. How can you're replacing a new window?
What's going into it is considered new construction and must comply. That's what we're...
Yeah, because City of LA, it's a express permit to replace exact windows.
Yeah, ours is not quite express because they have to get design review board clearance.
Even if you want to just change out a window?
Yes.
I have a window that is 10 feet by 8 feet. So that, okay, if I ever change that out, I got to go through. Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome to Glendale.
Well, the replacement of window, I understand, does require a lot of sign-offs from design review, whatnot. But to continue this conversation
50%?
further, discussion further, it looks like no. It looks like it says installation of glass or window. Mm-hmm. So that means if you have an existing window and the glass is broken. You still have to get... That is kind of odd.
Is that what it's specifying?
I don't know.
The code, the California code, used the term glass, glazing. We included window so that people knew that a replacement window is the same as replacement glass. The state code only called it glazing. So we tried to make it clearer by using the term window.
So now if you window
cracks,
pane cracks, if you replace it, we're supposed to come down and get a permit to replace it?
Actually, the replacement glazing is not, but the reason it's in there is because in the high fire hazard area, we want the tempered windows or tempered glazing to be the replacement glazing.
Okay.
So there is a section on whether you need a permit or don't need a permit that you still must comply. So whether you need a permit or not, that section of the code would require that in those high fire hazard areas that you have the tempered glass that helps resist the spread of fire in the high fire area.
Okay. I'm in the fire zone, so
okay. Yeah, definitely.
I'm lucky I didn't change my windows yet.
Yeah.
I have a question. What if it's historic, has a historic designation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Historic designations, many times we will get confirmation from our historic section of CDD, and if it's historic, we'll let them use whatever window to maintain the historic character.
Okay.
Like for like, exchange. Okay.
Right. Essentially, the historic code governs, and the historic code has specific regulations.
But then even though the manufacturer can make the tempered glass, even though it's a historical design, so that's what should be the requirement.
Right, and when they go through our historic section, they talk about all that.
Talk about that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so now let's look at that issue of section 1C-28 or 403.1. I'm sorry, IC-28, 403.1.
50% alteration.
It says 50% of its previous construction valuation. So to make it clear, apparently sprinklers will be required for alterations, additions, and whatnot when it is determined that the construction valuation is more than 50% of its previous construction valuation. Now, the other one was quite different. That was based on replacement value. A replacement value of a structure, I understand you can estimate that today. What the replacement value of an existing building will be, then you can take the 50% of it, and the person would know what to do. But how do we go by 50% of its previous construction valuation for an existing building, which could be like 20, 30, 40 years old? And at the time, construction valuation was probably
I think the
dollars for thousands.
The verbiage, the existing value or existing valuation, is just a clarification on the 50% used that we currently do for sprinklers. We use the 50% valuation. If it increases the value, 50% alteration, that means we had to base it on something. We use the current valuation to determine whether or not it's over 50% or under 50%. We tried to mimic that in the same for existing buildings, and that is, especially on the residential side, if you do a major alteration, that all the drywall's off, all the framing's off, that's the time then you make it seismically sound. That's where you try to make it energy efficient. And this allows us, if you go exceed that 50% value to your alteration, that we will be doing that. We will be trying to bring it up to current standards.
No, I understand your point. We had a very good discussion on that, and Stuart Tom explained it. But I'm saying that the verbiage apparently is different. This is not mimicking the exact same thing that the other section did.
It's not mimicking exactly. We thought we were clarifying it, making it even clearer.
Previous construction valuation. So that means, okay, let's say I find an existing building today. I come to the building department. I want to do an extensive alteration, such that it's over 50%. Over 50% of what?
The existing value, what it's worth right now at the time they're going through.
But it doesn't say that. It doesn't say replacement value. It says 50% of its previous construction valuation. Does that refer to the back to when the building was built?
The intent was the current value, doing over a 50% alteration to it.
But why don't we say the current value or replacement value as opposed to saying previous construction valuation? This is a technical legal term, and I think it's going to have a lot of arguments. So
we
that's
have no problem
trying to
incorporating
clarify
that.
Okay. I think we should. There's 3 places that this verbiage is used, and I think they should all be consistent. Exactly, as opposed to using different things.
Yes, we'll take that recommendation, Chairman. Any other questions for Volume 1C?
Questions?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about Volume 2, 3, and 4, and together because it's just one slide for each, basically. Volume 2, it's the 2016 California Plumbing Code, which is based on the 2015 Uniform Plumbing Code, published by International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Official, IAPMO. And Volume 2, the proposed amendments are similar to that of the 2014 Glendale Building and Safety Code. There's really no significant changes to the plumbing code other than Section 105.2, as we mentioned earlier, in regards to reinspection. This section is actually in this code, but we amended it so that it be consistent with Volume 1A and 1B. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. And this is Volume 3, which is mechanical standards. Again, re-inspections was amended in here to be consistent with Volume 1A and 1B and plumbing. Volume 4, which is electrical standards, which is the 2016 California Electrical Code based on, and based on the 2014 National Electrical Code as published by National Fire Protection Agency. Many of the proposed amendments are similar or the same as 2014 Glendale Building Safety Code, and we didn't have any significant changes to the electrical standards. So, also, I guess we can move on to the next one as well. This is only one slide. In Volume 5 is the Housing Code, which is the California State Housing Law continues to adopt the 1997 Uniform Housing Code as adopted reference. And in this section, in this volume, the proposed amendments are the same as the 2014 Glendale and Building and Safety Code. So with that, that is Volume 2, 3, 4, and 5. Do we have any questions from the board? Okay. So at this time, we're going to present. We're going to have Volume 6, which is the fire safety standards, and that will be presented by Stuart Tom.
Thank you. Chairman Kashishi and members of the board, I'm happy to say that Volume 6 is actually pretty stable. We don't have a lot of changes to it. And so I'll address them pretty quickly. Before I get into the few new items that we're adding, I'm going to talk about some provisions that we actually are removing from the code that we've had for quite some time. One in particular, we used to have a local amendment that required a helistop on top of high-rise buildings. It turns out that years ago, a very, very small number of communities thought that it might be a good idea to put a helistop on top of a building, and that has been in our code for quite some time. Turns out that while at the time it sounded like a good idea, helicopters and the use of a helistop on top of a building is not considered by the fire services throughout the United States to be an effective means of fighting large structure fires. And in fact, our GFD does not utilize that as part of our strategy for attacking fires in large buildings. So by virtue of the fact that it is not part of our fire response strategy, and also by virtue of the fact that due to the limited capacity, probably 1 or 2 people at a time, helicopters have never been recognized as an effective means of widespread structure evacuation. We have concluded, as many communities, that a helistop is not necessary. So we are removing that from our code. It turns out that most large communities that have tall buildings, in fact, iconic buildings like the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, and so forth, there's no flat area on top of a roof to land a helicopter anyway. And we are taking that approach. I think that it will actually change over time some of the character of our community, because for the first time ever, some of our taller buildings, we might actually be able to get some designs that have some character on top of the building instead of a dead flat surface, which unfortunately, because we've had this standard, some of the designs of our buildings have been limited. So I'm happy to say that we will be removing that. The second local amendment that we will be removing is, previously we had a standard which required oversized address letters for all of our buildings. Turns out that in other communities, neighboring communities, Burbank, Pasadena, Los Angeles, and so forth, they have no problem figuring out where the buildings are if there is an event. And here in our city, each of our fire stations go through regional and community familiarization, so they're very, very familiar with all of the areas within their particular fire districts. And if it were to turn out that there was a fire or an emergency on the 400 block of North Brand, the larger size letters are not why we are going to be able to show up on time very rapidly. We know where the buildings are. So as a result, we've removed that, and we're just going to adopt the same standard that is present within the fire code for the rest of the state. And we don't think that those extra size numbers have contributed to any increase in community safety. We have checked with our operational chiefs, and they've all said, yeah, we got no problem. In fact, rest assured, when a 911 call comes in, they're not driving down the street slowly looking at the address numbers to figure out where to go. They already know where to go. That being said, it takes us to the new provisions that we have added to the code, and in particular, for Volume 6, items 15, 16, and 17 are new. They are new. They are slight amendments to provisions which already exist in the fire code, and they are intended to improve some of the safety within our very high fire hazard severity zones. Before I get in, let me make sure that everybody here understands what the fire code is. The fire code is not a code which sets forth large numbers of building standards. While we do have a lot of standards which ensure that buildings are fire safe, all of those standards exist in the building code. The fire code is actually a use code, and the standards within the fire code ensure that all occupied structures are used in a safe manner so that the occupants within the building and people that use neighboring buildings are not put at unnecessary risk. One of those risks is whether or not open flame can cause unnecessary exposure of the environment. So as a result, in Volume 6, items 15, 16, and 17 have some slight changes to the use of portable outdoor fireplaces, and fireplaces and heating devices. Some of you may be familiar with those propane portable heating devices that may have like a mushroom on top. And then there are also some decorative ones. They're sometimes referred to as chimney outdoor portable furnaces with a large open flame that sort of climbs up this glass chimney. What we've done is we've put in some standards that limit the use of portable outdoor fireplaces, those portable heaters, and so forth within the very high fire hazard severity zone, in particular to ensure that they are a reasonable distance away from combustible construction and vegetation. So in many instances, you will still be able to have a portable fireplace or one of those portable heaters so you can enjoy the comfort of your backyard, but we do expect them to be a certain distance away from combustible construction. So the side of your building, in some instances, you may have a trellis or something of that nature. We need them, and there are two numbers, either 15 feet or 10 feet away. So as long as you keep it away from the building, should be fine. The other important standard is that we are requiring these types of open flame devices to be at least 10 feet away from vegetation. And the reason that this is important is we have a lot of protected trees, oaks, bay laurels, and sycamores, in which case the canopy of those trees may actually come down into areas that we want to make sure that somebody does not put a propane heater right underneath the branch of a tree, and they need to use some common sense and make sure that those are at least 10 feet away from those trees. And then the last thing is even if people are using their outdoor fireplaces, their portable barbecues, and their portable heating devices in a responsible manner, you can't use them on red flag warning days. So when the winds kick up very, very high and it's dry and it's hot, we don't want you using those open flame devices, because as careful as individuals may think they are, all it takes is one gust of wind, and we all know what the Santa Anas are like. Sometimes those things blow so hard, they will blow embers not just into your backyard, into your neighbor's backyard. And so we've put this into our code, and all three of these standards are intended to see to it that people use these in a responsible manner. And that's it. Those are the only changes that we have to Volume 6.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions on Volume 6?
Mr. Tommy, I have a quick question. As far as the numbering system, the addresses you just mentioned, does this city require that numbers be provided, address numbers provided from on the buildings from the alleys also, or only from the street?
It's only required from the street side.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll move
Thank
on
you.
to Volume 7, 8, and 9. I'll go ahead and address all of them at one time. Volume 7 is the security standards, and in Volume 7, again, it's the same as the 2014 Glendale and Building Safety Code. We didn't have any significant changes to the security standards. Volume 8 is the commercial, industrial, and property maintenance codes. And again, it's all of the amendments there are the same as in the 2014 Glendale Building and Safety Code. And again, no significant changes there as well. Volume 9, and this is the green building standards, and the proposed amendments are similar again to the 2014 Glendale Building Safety Code. All energy-related amendments carried over except for one is radiant barriers, and a lot of reasons for that is one, for residential anyway, the 2016 Energy Code is now 28% more efficient than the 2013 Energy Code. So, and in a lot of prescriptive requirements, the radiant barrier is actually required in Climate Zone 9. And the 2016 Energy Code compliant homes will, with the new code, would actually be zero net energy ready. So a lot of our buildings with the new 2016 energy code they're going to be zero net energy ready, because 2019 we have to be at that point according to the state. So, and with that is conclusion of this presentation. Anyone has any questions on volume 7, 8, and 9 at this time? Any questions?
I guess not. Well, thank you very much.
One more thing.
Oh, yes.
One more thing is on the board right now is basically the timeline of this code adoption. And today we presented the draft presentation to the Building Fire Boards of Appeal. And 10/19, we want to come back for the final presentation to the Building and Fire Board for adoption. And then for 11/01 is when we want to introduce it to the City Council. And then 11/15 is when we come back to City Council for adoption. And then on January 1st, 2017 is basically the effective date for this new code. And then in the next slide, and basically this is where you can get some information or purchase some codes and documents at these websites. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, if the board members have no questions, and if we are okay with the recommendations for amendments as presented here, with a little tweaks here and there that we discussed, is there a need for you guys to come back to us in October? Or can we just skip that one?
Well, we have to take a vote, right?
Well, we can take that vote today.
Well, new business means it's introduced. Next week, you'll actually form your recommendation to the council.
It also gives the general public an opportunity, now that we've made the presentation, to provide input that we may need to address at the next meeting.
Okay. Point very well taken. Thank you. Just trying to save some time for you guys here.
We do appreciate that.
Following up on the timeline that was presented, does that also mean that the code is going to, the effective date is the 1st. Is there any type of introduction, any type of notice given to the community?
An outreach, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. That's the word I was looking for, an outreach. And is there, the second part of that question is any type of grace period?
There technically is no grace period, because once we reach the effective date, those are the regulations that we're required to enforce. The document that you have in front of you is available on our website, and we do have on the Building and Safety page information about it and the links to be able to get to this document. So if anybody wanted to research to anticipate what was coming, that volume is there. We also are posting any trainings that we have available, either through ICC, the LA Basin chapter, or some of our CALBO, and then some of our vendors that may be training, having some local training opportunities on specific topics, such as fire stopping. Those we are also making available on our webpage as well. And then once we have council formal adoption in November, then we will have the final code posted as soon as possible thereafter, and we will update our frequently asked questions to be able to address some of these code changes on our webpage.
I think number 9 is going to be the big one, because everybody's got their little outdoor burning thingies. With all this, you're going to have to do something publicly, because it's not going to be enough that we just make these announcements locally, because a majority of the viewers here don't watch GTV6 and in that essence. So that would be my recommendation, because especially that one will hit almost every household, especially with the barbecue and different things.
I agree, and it's such a significant safety, outreach matter in terms of.
If I may, Your point is very well taken. As I had mentioned before, Volume 6 is not a building construction standard. It's a use code, and the first step is to put the safety standards in the code so that people are not allowed to use open flame devices on red flag days when it's blowing really hard, have open flames underneath tree branches and so forth. Once the standards are in the code, the GFD has a tremendous outreach section, and we will see to it that the information does get out to our community just to let them know, especially in our hillside wooded areas, in our canyons, and all of those areas, because we want you all to be safe. And while you may all be safe, we want to make sure that your neighbors also are not putting you at risk by putting an open flame portable heater 2 feet underneath the limb of an oak tree. So we will see to it that through the Glendale Fire Department website, through our newsletters and everything else, that we get the information out to the community. But this is the first step. We want to see to it that the restrictions are in place.
Thank you. But you have a very good point. I wish there was a way that we could. I mean, historically, it's always been like that. I can't imagine if there's any community out there that they do an outreach to teach the code or the construction requirements to the design professionals out there. And as we know, there's a ton of design professionals out there who practice the code every day without knowing what they're doing. So, unfortunately, I wish there was a way to do that, but no one has initiated that yet. Maybe Stuart and I, when we retire, will do something about it.
Soon.
Thank you.
The way that it was presented by staff, the blue and the green, was very nice, very helpful for us to follow. Is that practice also introduced to the public in terms of them knowing what's old and what's new? That's the way it's presented, so you don't have to go through and say, oh, that's the new one, that's the old one.
I believe that the packet that is available online also includes the information in the adoption matrix and the explanation and the justification for each amendment, an explanation, a legend, if you will, to explain the different color significance.
Very good.
Well, my suggestion will be, to pick up the code and read the green and the blue and the black and white, the whole thing.
It's a lot of reading. I just wanted to comment on the PowerPoint. It was very well put together. Thank you very much. Is that available online?
We can make it.
We can make it available.
It is now.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. It was a very comprehensive and impressive presentation. Thanks very much. So, let's continue with your agenda.
Going on item number 8, comments from commissioners.
I think we made enough comments. Okay, thank you.
Item number 9, reports, information only.
Item number 9A, Building and Activity Report Monthly Income Summary for fiscal year 15-16. I just wanted to give the board members an update on how we completed fiscal year 15-16. If you look at the Building Activity Report, the 2 columns on the right of the page, year-to-date and previous year-to-date, if you follow those down to the totals, you can see that we completed fiscal year 15-16 down in our total construction valuations, approximately $92 million over the previous year. If you look at the middle column of the section in the middle of the page, we have the year-to-date total number of permits. We were up approximately 350 permits for the year. Looking at those two kind of tells us that, okay, we're pretty much done with the super huge projects that we've had in the past 4 years. The projects that seem to be coming through are slightly smaller in valuation. and we, based on the number of increase in the number of permits issued, that we've had a significant increase in the number of remodels and tenant improvements over previous years as well. So our number of permits is up, but our valuations is down. Overall, we're dealing with smaller projects. If you look at the monthly income summary, you can also see where our income was down approximately $1 million over the previous fiscal year. So we may have reached our peak. Years prior to this, our income was spiking, our valuations were spiking. This year, we sort of leveled off. Whether this current fiscal year we take a drop or we maintain that same income level, we've yet to discover. We've been holding steady, so it may be that we're at a level point. We haven't started any major fall off in the number of permits or the income over fiscal year 15-16. Also, I wanted to point out that through our Permit Services Center, if you look on the Building Activity Report page, at the bottom we have a customer count. You can see that we dealt with approximately 48,000 customers through our Permit Services Center, which is 10,000 more customers than we did the previous year. So we were handling a great number of inquiries, a great number of people coming in trying to figure out if they want to follow through on a submittal and obtain a permit for one of their construction projects. That concludes that item, unless the commissioners have any questions about this. Okay, item number 9B, Work Boot Tuesday with City Council. I'm not sure if you've been following. Our City Council has been once a month having what they refer to as a work boot session, and they're going through various city departments and actually hands-on, either touring the power plant, seeing our Verdugo Operations Center in action. In January and February of 2017, they have tentatively scheduled Work Boot Tuesdays with our Permit Services Center and then field inspections. Right now, those dates are tentative. They aren't set in stone, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware you are also invited to attend these sessions. They're generally a Tuesday afternoon, starting somewhere around 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, depending on what council has also on their calendar for that day. So January is anticipated to be the Permit Services Center, and February is anticipated to be field inspections. As we have further information, we'll be certain to keep you in the loop, and as I stated previously, you're also welcome to attend. One other item that's not on the agenda, but it's more along the lines of an announcement. I wanted to confirm that each of you received the information about Assembly Bill 1234 requiring ethics training of all boards and commissioners. We have a tentative completion date of October 1st that everyone is to have that training by that date. The training is available online if you wish to take the session and go through the session online, or there is a class, face-to-face class being offered on September 26th at 4:30. You are required to RSVP to that class if you are planning on attending. So if you've received that, then you don't need to take any further action except either take the online or attend the class. If you did not receive that information, let me know, and I will make certain that that information gets forwarded to you so you can have the links for the online class or have the specific information on who to RSVP to for the face-to-face class. And that concludes the reports.
Item number 10, adjourned.
A motion to adjourn.
I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn their meeting.
I'll second it.
Thank you. And we'll see you next time.